Could you tell us a little bit about your early life and how you came to go to school at Black Mountain?
Well, it starts, I guess, with my induction into the Navy during World War II, which was in 1944 for me. And I was in the Navy from 1944 to 1946. On board one ship all of the time. We commissioned the ship. I mean the whole crew, and I was just a member of the crew. We commissioned the ship in Brooklyn, New York, and went out to sea for a trial run in Long Island Sound and ran aground. And which became something interestingly. I was looking up on the internet about the USS Trigo, which was the name of the ship that I was on. And the whole history of our running aground in Long Island Sound on our trial run was there. And not only did we begin to run aground, and the ship was listing, this was like in the middle of the night, the officer of the deck went running to the captain's quarters and woke the captain up out of a sound sleep and said that we're actually drifting on our anchor. What should we do? He said, that's your problem, and he went back to sleep. So the ship literally reached the beach, and they tried to reverse the engines to get off of the soft sand. And instead of reversing the engines, they went full speed ahead and ground us further onto the beach. And we had to wait until the tide changed, and 2 tugboats came from New York and dragged us off the beach. And we went back into dry dock for a month and a half while they repaired the hull of the ship, which had done some serious damage on the beach. And that's how we began. But that was a revelation to me because I got liberty every night, and as long as I was back on the ship at midnight, I could go to Manhattan, go to the theater, I went to the opera, I went to concerts, and I got all free tickets, from the USO, and it was a wonderful experience. And my life in the Navy was very much like that. So anyway, I retired from the service in 1946, and because of the GI Bill, I could go to college for free. And I went to RISD for 2 years. The first year was very exciting, sort of an introduction to the arts. And we had drawing classes, painting classes, and sculpting, and even some mathematics. And the thing that intrigued me the most was going to the textile department and sitting at a loom and making a sample. And it only lasted for about a week altogether, but I thought, this is really intriguing, and I want to know more about how to weave. So in the second year, I moved into the textile department, and there were a lot of these old gentlemen about my age who had been in the textile business all their lives and had retired, and then during the war, they sort of filled in at RISD, teaching the technical aspects of weaving. And it was very boring, and I was not very happy. And one of my classmates was so unhappy she quit, and she went to the University of Chicago. And while she was there, she went to a lecture that Albert Levy had given about education in general and Black Mountain College's relationship to that world. And she said, I think you should look into this college. And not knowing exactly what else to do, I wrote to Black Mountain College and said that I was very interested in weaving, and I understood that there was a weaving department. And I had a letter back by return mail from Andy Oates, a personal letter. And just on the basis of a personal letter from a college, I said, I'm going to go there. And it was a very nice letter, and she explained the situation at Black Mountain and that I had certain things, obligations that I had to set up my own education period. And so I just went on the grounds of that letter. And this long train ride from Manhattan to to Black Mountain, North Carolina. The train literally went all the way to Black Mountain and then on. And it took like 24 hours, I think. And I was just sitting up in a coach and arrived very bleary-eyed and confused, and no one met me at the station or anything like that. And I took a cab to Black Mountain, and he deposited me in front of the dining hall. And I didn't know what to do from there. And I think that Lily Bodke was the first person to come out, and she was responsible for housing new students. So she took me to the two lodges that were there, and I was to be in one of the dormitories. And there wasn't anyone else around. I don't know where everybody was, but they weren't to be seen anyway. And she took me up to the studies building and introduced me to my second weaving teacher, whose name just went out of my head, but it'll come back. So that was my beginning. And at the Mary Fitton, who became Mary Fitton Fiore, was starting that very day. She arrived shortly after I did, in the same way, in a cab. And we sort of related to one another immediately because she had been in the Army, and she was on the same terms as I. She was very interested in writing, and so we began together. And this was in February. It was in the winter session. And from there on, I began to meet various people. And then I met the most important people of my first year at Black Mountain, and that was Bob Rauschenberg and Sue Weil. And we became sort of like a trio. And we did everything together. We went to the movies together. We took classes together. Because I was studying with Annie, they decided that they would like to learn how to weave as well. And so they took the class with me. And the first assignment that we had was to each build our own backstrap loom. And a backstrap loom is more or less the most primitive form of weaving. But on a backstrap loom, the Peruvians did incredible things. And so I think that was our introduction to Annie Albers and her attitude towards weaving. And it took us days and days to build a backstrap loom. I don't think any of us really knew exactly what we were doing. But we would sit in the sun on the top deck of the studies building because it was warm up there, and you could sit in the sun even in February. And we would polish our beater, with a wooden beater. And it got to be finer and finer, so that was the best part of the backstrap loom. And I think at that point, Bob and Sue decided that they'd had enough of weaving already.
I can't imagine eating
No.
that. I just can't picture it.
So I started to make a tapestry, and I think it was pretty good. I got about this far, and that was about halfway. The width of the fabric was like that, and so the completed tapestry was supposed to be something like that. And I didn't realize, but Annie Oates had done several things that were very similar to this, and it was almost like some kind of an instinct or something, because I hadn't seen that many of her fabrics. So I got this far, and that was about as far as I got with the tapestry, and I've had it for years until it was in a trunk, and I opened the trunk, and moths flew out, and
Oh, no.
it was pretty much disintegrated, so I threw it away.
That's sad.
I'm sorry that I did. I could have.
I'm sorry. Very sorry. So you studied weaving with Annie. Can you talk a little bit about Annie Oates as a teacher?
Yes, she was a very inspirational teacher, and she talked a lot about not only weaving, but in its relationship to the rest of life. And she and Albers had just come back from Mexico, and they'd been to Peru, and Annie had started to make a collection of ancient Peruvian tapestries and of various wearing apparel.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of a collection that I think that it's gone to Yale.
So true.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. But for a little while after the Alberts left, I was curator of the collection. And we had exhibitions of it, and people at Black Mountain generally didn't know anything about this collection. And we used the little building in front of the studies building. I can't remember now what it's called, but it had a particular name. And it was where people had exhibitions. We had readings of poetry there and lectures and so on. A small building, very cozy in a way, not unlike this space right about here. And so I was very cautious about how people handled the fabrics and everything. And then they went back into a trunk. And eventually, Annie found a home for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she was quite happy that there were only 3 of us in her class. And there was a young man who, for some reason, she had particular dislike to, and she wanted to know why he was there. He came to the first class, and he said, "I'm interested in weaving." She said, "Are you really? Are you really interested in weaving?" She said, "I don't think you are, and I think you're in the wrong place." And he just excused himself from the class, and that was it. And so she ended up with the 3 of us. And we sat and talked and asked questions. And she had a very sort of refined attitude towards weaving and towards life in general. And shortly after I started working with her, she and Albers left. And Trude Guermont-Pré remained. She had been Annie's assistant. And Trudy had designed a fabric for a house in Asheville. And I can't remember who the architect of the house was. It was for a German couple who were refugees during the war. And they found their way to Asheville and built a very modern house. And I don't know whether it was Mies van der Rohe or someone who was connected with Black Mountain College initially, but they commissioned Trudy to design an upholstery fabric for the living room. So she did, and it was approved. And she set up the warp, which is a 56-inch loom, and it was a countermarche loom, which I didn't know anything about. But she had set it all up, and she said, all you need to do is learn the treadling, and you can weave this fabric. And I thought, my goodness, okay. And shortly after that, she left for San Francisco, and I was responsible for producing this fabric. Well, I don't know, you probably don't know anything about countermarche looms, but they are the most difficult hand looms to operate, because when you're lifting certain harnesses, other harnesses are dropping, so you get a wide shed, supposedly, which would work on some of the treadles, but on other of the treadles, the shed was about this high, and you had to get the shuttle through, and warp threads would go ping, ping, ping as the shuttle was hitting them going across the fabric. And it was a nightmare. And I got very bored with it because I was constantly repairing broken threads and everything. And for a while, I just gave up on it. And then the people who had commissioned the fabric said, we're getting very tired of waiting for this fabric. And I think it was like 15 yards of material that they needed. So I set up, and I worked on it for practically 24 hours straight, and I've made a lot of progress. So the following day, I was almost finished with it. And so I was very pleased, and we delivered the fabric, and I saw the house, and I can't remember where it was, but it was in the suburbs of Asheville somewhere. And it was a very interesting house, and that was my project. So I completed it, and everything was good.
Well, you eventually moved from weaving into photography. How did that
Yes.
happen? It sounds like you were very dedicated to the weaving.
Yes. Well, I was, except that I had no more direction at that point. And when Trudy left, whom I liked very much as a teacher and as a person, it was followed up with Molly Ehrman came for a summer, and that was fine, and I worked with her a little bit, but at that point I had become interested in photography, and I think that was through Bob Rauschenberg. I think he was the one who decided to work with Hazel. So because we were such a trio, I felt like I should find out more about this too. And it hit right away. And I took my first photographs when I was 12 years old, when I went to New York City with my aunt and uncle, and I took a box camera with me, and I took photographs at the World's Fair, which we had gone to see, and I can't remember if it was 1939 or 1936, but it was in the late 30s. And I took some photographs of Rockefeller Center, and I was so impressed with the height of these buildings. So I took with my Brownie, I took some photographs which, to this day, if I knew where they were, they're around somewhere. I was impressed with them the last time I saw them. I thought, this kid knew what he wanted to do, you know, with this camera. So that was my beginning. And Hazel was a wonderful teacher. And she, as you probably know, she had had polio as a child, and she was completely infirm from the waist down. And she wore these heavy, painful braces on her legs, which allowed her, with crutches, she could walk anywhere. She'd walk up the, a quarter mile to the studies building if she couldn't get a ride. And but Natasha Goldowski thought that Hazel could learn to walk. And Hazel thought she could learn to walk too. So Natasha said, you've got to take these braces off. You'll never get anywhere if you rely on these braces all the time. So we would have these sessions with two strong people on both sides of Hazel without her braces on, trying to make steps, and it was like a baby learning how to walk from scratch. And it never was very successful. But Hazel decided that she could do without the braces a lot of the time. When she was in her own little house, she could move herself across the floor from place to place, go into the bathroom, which was the dark room as well. And so a lot of the time, we would pick her up, fireman's, whatever it's called, and carry her to the dining room so that she could have lunch, and then carry her back again. And if there was some kind of an event going on in the evening and she was going to be sitting most of the time, she'd do without the braces. And at times she would wear them because she had to. But they were always painful for her, really uncomfortable. And so the dark room was in her bathroom, and her classes were in her living room in this little cottage. And we did various projects with her, learned a lot about other photographers. We had a copy of Beaumont Newhall's book, The History of Photography, and it was kind of like a little Bible. And so years later, when I decided that I wanted to graduate from Black Mountain, one summer, incidentally, was one of the summer in the arts, and we thought it should include film. So we not only selected some films for every other evening in the dining room, but we also wrote to Charlie Chaplin in Hollywood to invite him to be a lecturer for the summer. And we had a very polite letter back saying, unfortunately, Mr. Chaplin is not able to come to the United States because he wasn't allowed. But we didn't know that at the time. So that was nice, but it didn't happen.
That's a story I hadn't heard before.
Right. So I decided on my third year, winter and summer, that I wanted to graduate, because I thought if I didn't graduate, I would be like Willie Joseph, who had been there for years and with no intention of leaving at all. And I thought this would be so easy, just to continue on doing whatever. And so I set up a program for myself. And one of my programs was to teach weaving to beginners in a summer session. And the other was to have an exhibition of my photographs and produce a couple of portfolios. So those portfolios were part of my graduation project. And then I had to find someone in my field to come to Black Mountain and say that I was ready to be put into the senior division with the intention of graduating. And so with dumb courage, I guess it was, I went to Edward Steichen at the Museum of Modern Art. He was the director of photography at that point. And I got an appointment with him, and he was, you know, the grand old man of American photography at that point. And I think he must have been like 80 years old at that point, because he was taking photographs in the...
Yeah.
Oh.
All right.
Okay.
We'll roll.
I got an appointment with Edward Steichen, and I went to the museum, and I suddenly realized what I was doing for the first time. I mean, the whole setup was quite impressive and everything.
Different from Black Mountain.
Yeah. So I had gone specifically to ask him if he would be my examiner, but I went to show him Hazel's photographs. So I brought a collection of Hazel's photographs. And he said, these are very nice. He said, tell me about Hazel. And I said, well, she had had polio as a child, which I hadn't mentioned until then. And he said, no, really? That's very interesting, because I was commissioned by the Polio Foundation to commission 5 photographers to do posters for fundraising. So I have $5,000 for each one of 5 photographers to do these posters. And he said, it seems to me that Hazel would be a perfect person to ask to do that. So I was thrilled, because here I was coming back with $5,000, which was a lot of money in those days. And so I was on my way out of the door, very happy about everything. And I said, oh, by the way, I'm planning to graduate from Black Mountain. And in order to do that, because it's not an accredited school, I have to find someone in my field to come to Black Mountain and say that I'm qualified to go into the graduate part of the school. And he said, oh, I'll do that. I said, I don't know whether you know what you're talking about, because it's not easy to get there. And it's way back in the woods of western North Carolina. He said, I know all about it. He said, my brother-in-law is Carl Sandburg, and he has a sheep farm, a goat farm, I guess it was, right near Asheville and right near Black Mountain. And I can go and stay with him because my sister is married to him. So I said, that's wonderful. And so he said, you tell me when to come, and I'll be there, and you can come and pick me up and take me to the school for the day. So we did just that. I didn't drive at that point, and I didn't have a car. So Pete and Betty Jenner John went with me to the farm, and Carl Sandburg was standing on the porch with a black iron pan in his hand, eating scrambled eggs out of it. And he said, oh, hi. He said, I know who you are. And he said, so he went into the house, and Mr. Steichen came out and got into the car, and Carl Sandburg said, would you mind driving me to Asheville? He said, I've just won a national award, and I have to go pick up my telegrams in Asheville. So I can't remember what award he won at that point, but he had to go in and pick up his fan mail. And Betty, you know, who's quite a serious and intense sort of person, sat in the back seat with him, and with Carl Sandburg, and he said, what's your school yell? And she said, we don't have one. He said, I know all about your school. They invited me to come and give a lecture. He said, I wasn't interested in lecturing there, but he said if they'd like to hear me play the banjo and sing, he said I'd be very happy to come. And nobody ever asked him. But we delivered him, we deposited him in Asheville, and then continued on to Black Mountain. And Edward Steichen spent the whole day with me. And I got more and more intensely nervous because at the end of the day, I was having a meeting with the whole faculty and some students as well. And it was an oral examination. He saw my exhibition, and I said, "Do you like any of these photographs?" He said, "Yes, I like some of them very much." He said, "You're pretty good in black and white. Most modern photographers are not particularly good in black and white." He said, "In fact, I will buy a couple of photographs for the permanent collection." And he said, "We don't pay very much, I have to tell you that." And so I think I got $15 a print or something like that. But to be in the permanent collection of the museum, it was something in itself. And we had lunch together with some of the other students and faculty, and it was all very relaxed. And he started to tell us about his experience with the famous dancer. What was it?
Male or female?
Martha Graham?
Who?
Martha Graham?
No, it was
Yeah.
earlier than Martha Graham. He was in Venice, and he was taking a gondola trip, and here came along a group of people. This was like in the early teens.
Oh.
So anyway, she said, "Come to Greece with us."
Isadora Duncan.
Isadora Duncan. And he took that famous photograph of her with her arms up like this. And that was one of his great photographs. So he was telling the story about how all this happened, and everyone had their mouth open, And,
Sure.
and so then after lunch, we went to this more or less formal meeting. The rest of the day was very casual and everything. And I got more and more tongue-tied as they were asking me questions. And I began to think, I could faint at this point easily. And Steichen just took over the whole meeting. He started talking, and he was talking about this young man whom he hardly knew, but it didn't make any difference, And he said, is he worthy of going out into the world on his own? He certainly is. And, then he kind of looked at various people in the audience. He just knew how to handle a whole situation. He'd been around for a long time and seen a lot of things, so this was no new experience for him. And so that was the end of the meeting, and I was in the graduation mode. And
Well, talk a little bit about Hazel as a teacher.
yeah, she was an inspirational person, and she also liked to listen to people, and she was very encouraging when somebody began to do some new sort of projects. And one of the people who was taking her class, she had a large class, by the way, by Black Mountain College standards. I think there were like 9 people in the course. And some of them were really dedicated photographers and intended that to be part of their career. And I think that was Hazel who encouraged them to do that. And we decided to do one of the brochures for the college called Five Photographers. I can't remember exactly. I think that's what it was called. And I was one of the photographers. Vernon Phillips was one. Someone's name is, I can't remember now who all of them were. But we started putting some of our favorite photographs together with the idea that each photographer would have maybe three prints, original prints in the initial portfolio. And so we did all of that, and then we thought we should have it printed, and that it could be a brochure for publication for the college itself. So I went to Philadelphia to talk about the book with the printer, and that was my first experience with printing a book. But that was very exciting too. And I can't remember how many copies we had made, but they all disappeared over the years, and I never had a portfolio myself. So it's been years since I've seen those photographs. But that was all because of Hazel. And I think she backed it financially herself, because the college didn't have that kind of money. And she was always very liberal with printing paper and film, and she would lend people cameras and everything. So it didn't cost the students anything to take her course. It's maybe, $35 here and there, but that was it.
The other people in the class, can you talk a little bit about some of the other people who were in the class and if they ended up being photographers or?
Well, of course, Bob Rauschenberg did in a sense. And when I was working on my graduation project, I spent hours in the darkroom trying to make decent prints and everything. And so I had a waste paper basket full of rejects. And then I went to lunch one afternoon, and when I came back, they were all gone, and I just thought maybe Hazel had put them in the trash or something, just to get them out of the way. Years later, I went to a party after a dance performance with Merce Cunningham's group, and Bob Rauschenberg was there because he had done the sets for the performance. And he said, "Did you ever wonder what happened to your photographs that were in the trash can?" And I said, "Yeah, I just thought Hazel had taken them and thrown them away." And he said, "Well, I swiped them," he said, "and I used them in a couple of my paintings." And I said, "You didn't really?" So I have this huge, thick catalog of Rauschenberg's work. I mean, it's literally that thick. And I've been through the early collage paintings and everything, trying to find my photographs, but I've never found them. I think they probably just disintegrated because most of them were just, they hadn't been fixed or anything, so they would have just gotten darker and darker and so on. So.
Talk a little bit about the other people who were at the school and some of your other classes. You were there during a very exciting time.
Yes. Well, the summer session in the arts there were performances every night, every afternoon. There were rehearsals in the dining hall that one could attend, Catherine Litz was there with a group of her group. And Merce Cunningham was there, and David Tudor, and any number of great people who more or less all passed away at this point.
There was a great deal of controversy after the Albers left.
Yes.
Before their departure.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about
Yes, I never quite understood why the Albers felt that they had to leave. I mean, no one said you've got to leave. But there were two factions during that time. There were always two factions involved. I guess in most educational environments that sort of happens. But the Bodkis were on one side, and the Albers were on the other side, and the Dryers were with the Albers, and there were a group of people who were sort of on the other side. And I think that the Albers thought that their time was up as far as Black Mountain went. And I think nobody at that point understood the power of Joseph Albers as a teacher. He was a great teacher, and he was appointed head of the arts department at Yale University shortly after he left Black Mountain. And Annie was trying to establish herself and her reputation in the United States. And so they lived in Manhattan most of the time, I believe. And I went to visit them once. And previous to their leaving, Albers assigned me to make copies of some of the student color projects. And they were done on, the original projects were done on sort of cheap construction, color construction board, which tended to fade, and it wasn't very strong color for one thing. So he had a collection of coated color paper, and he wanted to reproduce some of the original students' work for a book that he was doing. And all of this became a book in the end. And I did maybe 20 reproductions of the students' work in good color, so that they would show up in the book. So that was a very exciting project for me too. And I would go to the Albers' house every evening and have coffee and cookies and start working on these. And Albers became a very easy and natural sort of person, unlike the teacher part of Albers, which was rather formal and strict. And he said, some people talk about Germans as being very strict and so on. He said, well, I want you to know, I come from Westphalia, and we are the strictest of all. And when you went to his color class, you had to do an assignment. And if you didn't fulfill your assignment, you'd better not go to the class, because you would be kicked out anyway. If you didn't produce a project for that class, he didn't want you in the course. And one day, I can't remember who it was, but a young woman came as a student to the class late. And he said, you can't come to my class late. That's very insulting. She said, I just came from the dentist, and burst into tears. He said, I don't care. He said, you haven't done any work, so get out. And that's the way he was.
Was she allowed to come back to the next class?
Oh, yeah, if you did your assignment, you could come back. And for the longest time, he would build me up every day. These are very interesting. I'm doing the project, but I'm doing something inventive as far as that. So that pleased him very much. And then at the end of a particular period of time, we had to produce all of our color studies as a group, on the sides of the walls and everything. And he said, as I began to understand, Oates here found a solution to producing color reactions and so on, but he didn't invent anything new. So he went sort of like flick, 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 and all these went on the floor,
No.
upside down. And so I was down at the bottom of the heap as far as the classes went. But he would do this with any number of people. And Bob Rauschenberg was one of his bête noire. And Bob had produced, he said, go out and make a construction out of anything that you find and bring it back as a class project. So Rauschenberg did a collection of autumn leaves in the form of one of the dogs on campus. This fuzzy sheepdog that had no structure in it whatsoever. You know, it's just a big mass of leaves and eyes and feet. And he brought this into class. And Albus turned red with anger and told him to get that thing out of this room. And Bob Rauschenberg was so depressed, I think he had to go off by himself for several days.
I've heard before that he was particularly hard on Rauschenberg.
Yeah, yes.
Do you have any insight as to why that was?
I don't know. He liked to sit with, Albers liked to sit with the class and look at the color studies and everything. And he always liked to have the most attractive young girl sitting beside him. And he would put his hand on his shoulder like he was instructing her about all of these color studies. And I don't think it went any further than that. I don't think Annie would have allowed it.
Could you talk a little bit about what things were like after the Albers left, just generally?
Yeah, I think it became a little bit looser. And I think that also people who were teaching history, like Albert Levy, and I can't think of the other person, an American, who was very interested in American history. But I think that they became a little more liberated because they had the feeling that they were more important than they had been in the past. Same with mathematics, and Max Dane was prompting and teaching Peter Nemeny to allow him to go to the School of Advanced Studies at Princeton, and which he did in the end. And I can remember when 2 FBI agents came to find out about Peter Nemeny, because I guess it was sort of parts of the school were top secret, and the FBI wanted to know about the education at Black Mountain College and about Peter Nemeny, who was, you know, a refugee from Europe, and so they would sort of have sort of casual interviews with various people walking up the path to the studies building or something of that sort. And I said, this is very suspicious, isn't it? So I would think that things became a little more liberal. I became interested in the farm at one point, so I decided that my school project would be to do something on the farm. And Ruth Asawa decided at the same point that she would like to get involved in the farm too. So she was doing an exhibition in the little building where we had, and she said, I'll probably be working on it all night, but she said, I really would like to go with you in the morning to the farm and work for a couple of hours. And so I went to the building where the exhibition was on, and it was all in place. and Ruth was sound asleep on the floor. And when I walked into the building, she sort of popped up, and she said, "I'm ready to go." And she always was. I mean, work was nothing to her. It was just something you did, whether you were tired or whether you wanted to do it or not. And she was an inspiration to me because she was kind of like my opposite in my casual way towards life.
So, what kinds of things did you do on the farm? Did they have the cattle at that point? Or?
Yeah, there were quite a few cows, milk cows,
Mm-hmm.
and one of my jobs in the afternoon was to take them back to the barn.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've had any experiences with cows, but they are very obstinate, and they're full of. I was just reading an article recently about cows, and they're very sensitive, and they're quite intelligent,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't always want to do the thing that they want to do. They all wanted to go back to the barn and get milked, but some of them would do anything except go back to the barn, and they'd go wandering off into the woods, and if you yelled at them, they would come back if they thought you really meant it. And you had to have a little stick, and you didn't have to use it very much, but once in a while you did. So that was my job. It took about an hour to get them back into the barn because they really wanted to go in the first place. And letting them out in the morning was very easy because that they knew that they wanted to do. And we hoed the fields of corn and did various things like that. Oh, and one of my projects was to make butter every day, or every other day, I guess. And we had tons of cream. So making butter was something that I really enjoyed doing. You had to squeeze all of the whey out of the butter and it was really delicious butter.
Could you talk a little bit about some of the other people who were there when you were there, like MC Richards would have been there?
Yes, MC was there, and she wrote a poem for my graduation. And yes, and I lost it, and I asked her about it, and she said, "I can't remember what poem it was." She said, "Give me a clue." And I said it had something about deer in it, the animal deer. And she said, "That doesn't ring a bell at all." So I never found out what poem it was. But anyway, she did that, which was very nice.
Did you take any classes with MC?
I went to all of her lectures, but I didn't take her classes. And occasionally when I went to New York, I would stay with MC and David Tudor. And they had they lived in an old tenement house, a building on the east side, and it was very derelict. And the toilet was in the hallway, which was shared by all of the other people on that floor. And so I had a sleeping bag on the kitchen floor. That was my bedroom. And one night, a rat ran across my sleeping bag, and they had a dog, and I grabbed the dog and I said, "You stay here, don't move." So the dog slept with me all night. They moved shortly after that, and MC became part of, David did too. They moved up to Hackensack and became part of the Williams retreat or whatever it was called. And I often went up there to see Paul and Vera, who I lived with in Boston for a time.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. We, and other Black Mountain people did as well.
Mm-hmm. What other classes did you take other than weaving and photography?
Well, aside from weaving and photography, I didn't take any formal classes, but I went to concerts and lectures and readings and all sorts of things like that. And I also got very interested in the kitchen, and I worked in the kitchen as part of my school project. And I became good friends with Alberta and with the other cook, I can't remember. And there used to be 3 cooks, and George was married to Cordelia. Was her name Cordelia? Yeah. And he was hopeless as a cook. I don't know how he got involved in the kitchen. And Vera and one of the other women took over the project of the kitchen and diet and so on. And they fired George right away. And the last thing he cared about was being fired. He was happy to go. And he became a cab driver. But Cordelia stayed on, and Alberta.
You were there that some of the DeCoons were there, and Bucky Fuller was there.
Yes, yeah. He and Hazel were very good friends. And Hazel occasionally would have a cocktail party. And Buckminster Fuller would come, but he didn't drink, So, but one time, the great dramatic 6-foot poet.
Olson?
Yes, Charles Olson and Connie were there with Buckminster Fuller and his wife. And I don't know who brought it up. It might have been Hazel. She said, "Do you know that noise that trains make when they're going through towns?" And I think Olson said, "Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about." And she said, "Can you make that noise?" And at that point, we'd all had some drinks, except Bucky Fuller. And he said, "Oh, I know that noise," and he made this wild noise. And he was the only one who had the courage to do it, and the only one who hadn't had anything to drink. But he was the most exciting lecturer there ever was. And he would start a lecture by standing up and start pacing, and everyone was sitting in silence, waiting for him to start talking, and he would walk and walk and walk, and nothing would come out. And then suddenly he would start talking, and he would talk for like 3 hours, and everyone was like on the edge of their seat if they weren't already sitting on the floor. And he was just absolutely inspiring. And he never knew what he was going to say, he said, until it came to him, like at the moment when he was supposed to start talking. And one night he took us in his white convertible. It wasn't a Cadillac, I guess it was a Buick, very flashy car, big, huge. He took us into the mountains on back roads and everything, and we got higher and higher and higher. And he said, "This is where the early settlers built their houses, not down in the valleys where they had their farms, but up on the hills where they could see over the mountains, And they always had these inspiring long vistas." And I was thinking of that this morning, looking out of my bedroom window. These wonderful, mountains, one after the other, with mists in the valleys, which sort of distinguished one hill from the next, and so on. And down below all of this wilderness in the background, or what looked like wilderness, and he had this super highway running through with hundreds of cars coming into Asheville. And I thought, where in the world are they all going to park? It seemed impossible. Yeah.